Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We are here with Lisa and Megan, and this webinar is on understanding and voicing the needs of Indigenous post-secondary students on Ontario campuses. My name is Tarin, and I am a knowledge and research lead here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. Before we begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. I want to start this session by acknowledging that even though we're here at a virtual session today, we are joining in from many ancestral lands of various Indigenous communities. I am currently in Toronto, Treaty 13 territory, the home of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and people who may still be unrecorded. As a settler myself, it is my duty to acknowledge the effects of colonialism and how it shows up in our day-to-day lives even today. And it's important for me to investigate how I may be participating in it and the ways I can actively push back against it. As we go through this webinar, I want you to think about the many ways that you are able to support Indigenous students and colleagues in your role to promote a whole campus approach to health and wellness, and also be an active participant in the reconciliation process. Next, I will go through some housekeeping. So closed captioning is at the bottom of the screen. You are welcome to turn it on. We do have French closed captioning as well. I will briefly go over that very quickly. So if you go to your right side of your screen, you will see the closed caption button. And I want you to turn on the translation toggle so that the white circle is to your right. And then I want you to change your speaking language or make sure that it's in English because this webinar will be in English. And then I want you to turn your caption language to French or any other languages you would like to set it to. The recording will be available at the end of the day. So if you have to leave, you're welcome to leave and you can check our website out and you can see our recording will be uploaded there. Questions will occur at the end, but if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can put it in our Q&A. Some of it may be answered while the presentation is ongoing. The chat function is open for folks to discuss your thoughts and reactions. Please be respectful. And we want to make sure that this is a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Megan VanEvery and Lisa Doxtator.
Thanks, Taryn. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so are we good to go, Taryn?
It looks great on my end.
Okay, all right, wonderful. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan VanEvery. I am Seneca Nation Turtle Clan from Six Nations, and I just want to acknowledge the time and place I'm sharing knowledge today. And I'm the Indigenous Knowledge and Research Lead at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. And today I will be highlighting our Indigenous Needs Assessment Survey. And I will be co-presenting with Lisa today. So our objective, my objective for today is outlining the purpose of our needs assessment and outlining our methodology, outlining our sample breakdown, and then just highlighting the student portion of the survey. And then I will be turning it over to Lisa to share her discussion and her role at Queen's University. And then hopefully we have some time for discussion and Q&A this afternoon. So our primary objective for our needs assessment is just to continue to identify the gaps that exist in supporting Indigenous post-secondary student mental health and well-being. This is our second year in completing our needs assessment, and our hopes is still to continue to better understand of how best to improve mental health services through using the voices of Indigenous staff and student perspectives. And for this year, we were able to have a French survey, which was definitely recommended from last year's responses. And so for our survey design, we did have open and ended survey questions, and there was two streams of questions. One that was directed directly for Indigenous staff, and one directly for Indigenous students. We did go through research ethics and did receive approval, and we did have to include a password to access the survey, as we learned from last year to prevent any bot attacks that we received from last year. And then through consultation, we did work closely with our various partners. For example, we held our Indigenous community of practice. And so these are representatives from Ontario colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes. And also we reestablished our Indigenous Advisory Circle, again, members from various colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes. And again, we just want to really show our appreciation and gratitude for their help and guidance in the delivery of our needs assessment. And then in the very beginning stages of our survey, we did present at the Colleges Ontario group on Indigenous Peoples of Education Council just for feedback. So now I'm just going to be highlighting the summary of our student survey. So for our survey, it was available from mid-May to mid-July. We did ask our community partners to please share our survey to staff and students, and we also posted on our own social media for promotion. We did have a gift card incentive. However, many of our respondents did not seek a gift card, which really just goes to show the importance of completing the needs assessment. And then moving on to just the summary. So as you can see here, there was 10 Indigenous students for our French survey. And then just to put into context, CICMH does complete a general needs assessment, and our Francophone community is relatively small in the number of responses that we do get. So for us to get the 10 Indigenous students for our survey, I think is a really good stepping stone, and really goes to show the importance of trying to get that reach out in that area of the population. And then comparing to our English survey, we had 76 Indigenous students. Compared to last year, this number definitely did decrease compared to last year. Last year we had over 140 Indigenous students. And then when we break it down by institution, most of the respondents from both our French and English came from the college and university sector. I do want to mention with our Indigenous institutes for this year for the English survey, our numbers definitely did increase compared to last year. Last year, I believe it was around 4%. So for us to have that increase in outreach definitely shows our relationship building is improving. And then when we break it down by region, many of them for the French survey came from the Northern and East region. And then for our English survey, many came from the Central and Northern regions. And then just to put into perspective and context, when we mean North, we're talking areas such as North Bay, Barrie, Aurelia, Owen Sound, Timmins, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie. And then Central, we are talking about like Toronto, the GTA, Durham region. And then with the East, areas such as Belleville to Ottawa, Southwest, London, Windsor, Sarnia areas, and West, including Brantford, Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph. And then I just wanted to make a comment with regards to the disparity compared to last year and this year's in numbers. We do acknowledge that we did have the survey during like the summertime, so there might have been less staff and less students on campus due to, yeah, vacation or graduation. But the reason we did for the earlier in the semester and not like in the fall and winter was because we wanted to have a question around a resource that we were going to be creating for Indigenous students transitioning to post-secondary. So we thought that it would be best to have that question now rather than having to go back to them later on. So for this year's needs assessment, we did add a few more questions to our survey around the accessibility of services on post-secondary. And so as you can see here, 62% amongst our English survey did access Indigenous cultural supports on campus. 41% did access Indigenous mental health counseling, and 44% did access non-Indigenous counseling as well. And so for those who did access these services, majority of students did say that their experience was neutral and positive. And then for those students who did not seek services, some of the reasons was that they had difficulty accessing supports on campus. So for example, there may have been hours of operation concern, for example, hours conflicting with their course schedule or personal work schedule as well, or just not a lot of appointments available to choose from. And many students were not aware of services available on campus that were available to them, and many felt that they were not Indigenous enough to access services. And so I do have two quotes highlighted here. So one student shares that I use other traditional methods for my counseling and support, and another student shares they are uncomfortable talking about their own issues and that there is a lot to unpack in a mental health session. Just in comparison with the French portion of our survey. So 60% did not access Indigenous cultural supports or Indigenous mental health counseling, and 50% did not access non-Indigenous mental health counseling. For the limited few that did access, they did rate their experience as positive and neutral. And again, similar to our English survey, many of the Francophone students identified that, again, they were not aware of services available on campus to them, and they did not feel Indigenous enough to access these services. Similar, again, as the previous question, we did add more questions around stigma this year. So 41% said that there is stigma when accessing mental health services on campus. And 53% did experience stigma themselves when accessing services. So some examples students shared was that they faced discrimination. They felt that they were not taken seriously by staff members or that they were not treated equally amongst their non-Indigenous peers. Some felt that they were judged and embarrassed, as highlighted in the quote here. So a student shares that I just feel judged and like I'm less of a person than others because I need mental support. And then 85% said that there needs to be increased awareness and knowledge about mental health to reduce stigma. And 63% said their mental health is impacting their ability to continue their studies. And this specific question we did have last year, and there was definitely a increase in number this year compared to last year. And then comparison to our French survey. So 50% stated that their mental health impacted their ability to continue studies. 60% shared that they were unsure if there was stigma around accessing mental health services. And 10% experienced stigma when they did access services. And some examples had to do with facing with prejudice. And 70% expressed that there needs to be increased awareness and knowledge on campuses around mental health to reduce stigma. And so another quote highlighted here. So a student shares that discussing the importance of taking care of mental health on an almost weekly basis. And again, this just shows the importance of mental health promotion and education to hopefully reduce those efforts and stigma. So we did ask students a list of barriers, and that they would just check off as many that they felt that either themselves or their fellow peers could face challenges when they access services on campus. And so the top three amongst our English survey was the inability to access help or services in a timely way. That was addressed previously with course schedules and hours of operation. And then the third was 42% felt that they had a fear of stigma and discrimination. And 37% felt that they did not feel Indigenous enough to access services. And then compared to our Francophone community, students expressed that they did not know where to go for help on campus, followed by also not feeling Indigenous enough to access services and not knowing where to get help within the community was their top three responses. And then I just wanted to highlight a quote from a student about their experience with accessibility. So they say, I had asked my accommodations person to reach out to my professors on my behalf because I was severely struggling with my mental health due to a traumatic situation at home. I was ignored, and 3 weeks later, they only responded with a general, I'm sorry this is happening. By the way, we need the receipts for your accessibility tools in the same email. So as we can see, there's definitely this lack of empathy and compassion and cultural safety not being implemented when dealing with students who are in crisis or dealing with personal trauma. And then from the barriers listed previously, we did ask what improvements could be made on campus. And we did find pretty much similar results between our English and French survey. So here's just common themes that we pulled out from that. So one of the themes was the improvement of accessibility of services. So again, expanding those service hours, extending those number of appointments for students. Second was increasing the awareness of services. So again, improving that visibility of services and promotions so students know where the services are located, and also knowing the type of services that are available on campus. Another theme was having programs that are culturally inclusive and accessible. So, for example, hiring more Indigenous staff to fill those roles and to provide support to students, having a space for smudging, having more opportunity for sharing circles to really connect and build that relationship. And then increasing workshops that reconnect to culture and that traditional knowledge. And then another theme was improved programming of services. So for example, increasing or establishing food programs. So for example, food banks on campuses. Establishing peer support programming. So for example, having talk buddies to have that peer-to-peer connection with them on campus. And then having support with their finances, so whether that is with budgeting or with scholarships or bursaries. And then also improving wellness incentives on campus. So this could be like food or self-care giveaways, things like that to help with their needs outside and off campus. And then lastly, just general information on mental health. So for example, having webinars or guest speakers or having courses just on how to deal with managing stress, anxiety, or depression. And maybe even through these initiatives happening on campus, it would help reducing that stigma that was addressed. And then I also wanted to share a really positive comment from a student sharing about their experience with the workshop. So they say cultural practices, crafting, things like that to improve mental health. I attended a ribbon skirt workshop and I was so happy about it after a month. Things like that really help with reconnecting and working on self-care. I also met a lot of staff from my institution I didn't know. It was a great opportunity to meet new people. I feel comfortable with reaching out to staff and also access to medicine's easy access. So here through this quote, we can definitely see by just having these type of workshops on campuses, definitely makes a difference to student well-being and mental health. And so lastly, so as I mentioned again regarding our transition resource, we did have a question in the survey. And so here is both a combination of both our English and French respondents. So many of the students did identify of wanting services that were both culturally safe around mental health, both offered on and off campuses. Even wanting to know more of that traditional knowledge and ways of knowing to improve one's mental wellness. And then learning strategies for stress and time management, especially around the busy campus seasons and exam time. And then lastly, just knowing how to address mental wellness and the importance of keeping healthy mentally. This is it for me. So again, thank you everyone, and I look forward to your questions at the end. And now I will share it to Lisa.
Thank you. Uh, Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Doxtator. I find this a little bit weird not talking to anybody, but I'm going to do my best. Uh, well, I mean, I know you're out there, but I can't see anybody, so I feel like I'm just talking to a screen. Um, but I'm the cultural counselor at Queen's University, and I've been invited here to talk about my experience as a cultural counselor and to speak about our students, some of our students' experiences as well. The first thing I wanted to just let you know is that in our 2020, those statistics that I could find the earliest for was 2021. And so we had 583 self-identified students enroll, and that made up 2.1% of our enrollment. And 479 of these were in undergraduate studies, and 104 were in grad studies. So just to sort of let you know where we stand in regards to our Indigenous students at Queen's. So I think one of the things that I need to start with is talking about colonization just briefly, because I feel like that's kind of at the heart of a lot of the struggles and challenges that our Indigenous students encounter when they get into post-secondary. Um, so these colonial structures where as you may or may not know, were developed to, as there's a quote that says, to kill the Indian and save the man. And so it was an institution designed to make Indigenous people feel badly about themselves. I guess actually, we want to be honest, it was to hate themselves and anything that had to do with being Indigenous. And so I think that's the place that we need to start because, well, I mean, intergenerational trauma didn't just start with residential school, but that definitely played a big part in it. Um, and so these colonial structures, you know, are built to legitimize uh, theory and thought and to validate it. And so I believe that these institutions are responsible for validating and legitimizing our Indigenous worldview because of the damage that they have done to Indigenous families and communities. And I think that for Indigenous students, what I've seen is that when they get into post-secondary, because a lot of them have not been exposed to their culture or their traditions, and they're not connected to their communities, that when they come into university, this is often the first time that they are learning about themselves and about history. And so that's why I say it's the beginning of a healing journey for our students, because that realization triggers many challenging ideas that they carry about themselves. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today are some of these experiences that our students have in post-secondary. Um, so relationship is really important in Indigenous community. And our relationship to the land is vital. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that students who especially come from those northern communities really struggle with their mental health when they come into this environment, because they lose that connection to the earth. And so that might be the beginning of a struggle right there for them. And then on top of that, they don't feel safe. You come into a place where you're not represented, you're not seen, you might not have a connection to your community, so you're isolated and you feel alone. And it's hard for Indigenous students to be able to reach out and to find their community because of that racism and oppression that we've experienced for so long. It's made us feel like we can't take up the space that we take up, or even breathe the air we breathe, or um, we're pushed right to the background and we're silenced, and it becomes a really difficult place for us to begin to be able to advocate for ourselves and support ourselves. So the four directions, our center here, is so important to many of our students. And I know I've even heard students that have said to me, I never would have made it through my university career if it hadn't have been for four directions. So this has become a really safe place for our students, and we've worked really hard to create this place of safety for them. So I think one of the other issues that our students struggle with is identity. And I know you heard the term in that survey, not feeling Indigenous enough, and often that's how our students are feeling as well. Well, first of all, they're afraid to come to the center because somebody might realize they're Indigenous, and that is a scary thought, that somebody might find out, and they feel like, if they do say they're Indigenous, people will say, well, you don't look Indigenous. Or as soon as you say you're Indigenous and you're in a classroom, all of a sudden you're expected to be the expert at being an Indigenous person. And like I said, oftentimes a lot of these students are just on their own learning path. So it makes them feel very intimidated and insecure in their Indigenous identity. So it's important that we have this place for our students. And oftentimes, well, this year, it's been nice because I've definitely seen an increase in our first year students coming to the center. But generally, we don't see students maybe at the end of their second into their third year. And I think, well, exactly what the survey said. For one, students don't even know that there are services specific to Indigenous students. So even though we have a center and we have two big buildings here, oftentimes I will hear students say, well, I didn't even know that this place existed. So definitely that promotion piece is really important. And I know that's something that we have talked about here with our student wellness, just to be able to promote our services and let students know that are coming through that there are services specifically for them. Um, so yeah, identity becomes a really big issue. And I know even within the center, uh, we can sometimes see those little cliques happening where, um, we get like our Métis students, and then we have like students who come right from the res, and then we have, or from the reserve, and then we have students who are urban students. And I think even within those groups, are unique differences. And so it's really important to try to manage those relationships. And that's why it's so important that us Indigenous staff who work at these centers, that we're very aware of our students and what the struggles are, and so that we can, model for them, how to resolve conflict, and how do we have these really tough conversations about identity, and how do we do that in a way that keeps people safe. So I have tried to run a few sharing circles on identity. Um, and I think for the most part, they were semi-successful. I thought that I would see a lot more students because I know in individual counseling, it often comes up. And in fact, that's why a lot of students seek out counseling in the first place, is just not feeling safe on campus. Um, so that's uh, some of the things that the students struggle with in regards to identity. Um, I think also just the services in general that students are able to access. So we have our accessibility services, and I work really closely with them. And some of the things that our students struggle with is, so like say in class, they're studying Indigenous studies, and they hear, things that they haven't heard before, and they get triggered while they're in class about their what it is that they're reading. And we don't really have any specific accommodations to address those things when our students experience uh, those kind of triggers. And so it's important that we have these relationships with those departments like QSAS that provide services to our students, so that we can advocate for them and support them. Uh, I think I really seen this. So Queens, we had a hate crime that happened in one of our residences a few years ago. And it was, we used to have a floor that was just for Indigenous students. And it was a floor for not just Indigenous students, but the two LGBTQ plus community as well. And the floor got targeted with a hate crime. And so at the time I was in this position, and um, we had a few students who actually ended up dropping out. And one of the things that I didn't realize after when I was able to talk to one of the students is that they didn't even realize that they had been triggered. So they had been going to a course, and when it came to the part where they were going to be talking about Indigenous people, the student just stopped going to class and never really gave it a second thought on their end about why they were doing that. But after I got to talk to the student, I realized that we need, when those kinds of things happen on our campuses, we need to really be aware of safety protocols. And if our students already aren't feeling safe on campus and those things happen, then how do we begin, and how do we start to address some of those things? The other service that we have for our students is, these Indigenous pathways. And I don't know how I really feel about them. I've talked to quite a few students from our med school, and also from our law program, who got in through these Indigenous pathways, and have really, the backlash to them getting in through these programs has been really hard on them because they will end up getting their peers saying things like, "Oh, well, you just got in because you're Indigenous," or you get special treatment because you're Indigenous, and so then students start, not stop telling that they may have gotten through this Indigenous stream, or stop coming to the Indigenous services that are here for them. In fact, some of the students that I had talked to, um, and it was just this year, didn't say that they were Indigenous, but they still want to do Indigenous work. So they're on a committee, but they don't tell anybody about the work that they're doing. So I think we really have a long way to go in educating our campuses and our programs, and also our students. And I think that's I was just actually over at the School of Medicine, and I was doing a panel discussion with some of the upcoming doctors. And when I was sitting there, I was thinking, this is exactly what we need to be doing more of, is not talking. I mean, the professors and faculty and people need to know, but it's the students who need to be held accountable for the things that they're saying to other students. And I shared that with them this morning about how Indigenous students in the med program feel about not wanting to let people know that they're Indigenous. And I know a lot of times people will say things and not realize that maybe there's someone Indigenous there because maybe they don't look Indigenous. And if people are saying things, then absolutely that doesn't make you feel safe and make you want to share. The other thing that's a really big a problem here is, when students find out that some, not all, but some of our Indigenous students, get funding from their communities. And so that creates another barrier for our students being able to connect and feel safe here. Um, I'm just wondering if anybody has a question. No questions yet? Okay. So I'll just continue on then. Um, yeah, so I guess I could talk a little bit about some of the programming that we do for our Indigenous students. Trying to take all of this into account about the services that we do have. And so at the center, we have all our services. Students can just come to the center and um, they can access everything here. So it's a one-stop shop almost for them. Uh, I'm embedded at Four Directions. We have an advisor here who's embedded at Four Directions. And we have like our promotion person and director. So we all sit in one building. And I think that this is a really effective way to service our students. Our students, they, well, not just our students, but as Indigenous people, we heal in community. Community is so important. It's so vital. And I think almost like I see Four Directions that way as a retention method for our students because of that relationship that we build with them. And I was sharing this morning that, this week, because of exams, I've been helping our students study, we get the old flashcards out, and I've done like mock interviews and these kinds of things. And it's interesting because if I was working at Student Wellness Services, I wouldn't get these opportunities to develop these kind of relationships with our students because they wouldn't get to see me outside of the office. And so that's why I think it's really important that we build community because sometimes I'll be out in the kitchen and we'll be sitting around the table And usually there's like 8, 9, 10 students will be sitting there, and we'll be having some real intense conversations. And I would consider that 8 counseling sessions that I didn't even have to do because their peers are counseling each other and, speaking to each other, sharing their own stories and their own experiences. Um, so, and I feel like that's quite different than, that what we would see in Western medicine. Uh, so, I don't know if anybody had a question that might help I don't know if there's anything else that people want to hear about.
Hi, Lisa. I did notice a
Eh,
question here in the Q&A.
Okay.
Karen says, I have a question. Those students that are band funded sometimes have a student success plan where they are required to get faculty signatures that confirm their attendance in class, effort, etc. This seems like an added barrier, especially for students who wish to keep their identity private, as you're saying. Do students have a right to privacy? And if so, do these conditions violate that?
I would say absolutely. Um, Unfortunately, I mean, those things are tied to their band funding. Um, we, I don't think I've heard a student here at Queens who's had that same experience. That probably goes by from like band to band with their regulations for funding. But I would definitely say that that does violate the privacy of a student, and it does create another barrier, for students to have to go through. And that would be someone from their own, that would be like a service from their own community that is doing that.
Thank you for that. We do have another question here. You talked about the issue of being triggered in classrooms when learning Indigenous content. What do students say about their needs when this happens, or in classrooms in general? What types of accommodations can be offered? On the other hand, it might be difficult not to learn Indigenous content in some classes.
Yeah, that's a big question, and I think that's something that we've talked about even here at Queens is about accommodations. And I know that Toronto, their accessibility services actually has an elder that can provide documentation for students. So I think that's one way to be able to validate that for students. I think it's also in the delivery of, a lot of times it's in the delivery of the content. It's sometimes I hear that it's delivered very similarly to the other ways that other content is delivered without that sensitivity that there may be, Indigenous students in the class. Um, I know one of the things that students say here is, if there's Indigenous content, why can't you bring an Indigenous person in to deliver it? And it's not helpful when people make comments like, not all residential schools were bad, or, there some good came out of residential schools, um, because maybe they're of uh, their own fears of unpacking those things that have happened. So I think if people are, one of the things I'm working with our Indigenous instructor who delivers the land-based instruction course, and I was seeing a lot of students coming from that course in counseling that were being triggered. And so the professor and I have met, and so what one of the steps that the professor has done is incorporated sharing circles once a week into the class, so students can get together and talk about things that might be triggering for them in the classroom.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not seeing any other questions yet. If folks want to ask more questions, oh, just as I said, we have another question. Can you share more about the semi-successful sharing circle that you mentioned? With the current climate of pretendians, descendians, and fraud, How are you able to navigate students who are unsure of their identity, or as Kim Tallberg speaks about, family lore?
Yeah, this has been a really hard one to navigate. Like I said, that I did have I mean, I did have students coming out to the sharing circle, and I don't want to take away from them because I know they did do a lot of work in trying to come to terms with their own um indigeneity. Uh, and like I said, I think what's really helpful is to create a safe place for students to open up because they feel like they're the only ones who feel this way. Especially when you get into individual counseling and they start to open up, that they often don't realize that there's so many other students out here who feel the same way. So I think that was one thing that was really helpful, was them coming together and being and able to open up and talk about how unsafe, they felt about, uh, disclosing that they were Indigenous and, experiences that they were having on the campus. One thing I find in with this group of young people, it's like pulling teeth to get them to share. I don't know what's happened, because in individual counseling, they're talking about all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, this would be great. Let's have a sharing circle so everybody can talk about it together. And then we get there and people are quiet, quiet, quiet. So I think it's just this distrust. And I don't even know that it's within four directions or within I think it's more uh where we're at in this world with our young people feeling judged and not accepted and feeling that they have to be perfect and being afraid to offend somebody, with this kind of climate that we have of, you know, trying to always be so politically correct. And so I think it's created a environment for students who are really scared to say the wrong thing.
We have another question here. Can you share some of the reasons that some Indigenous students with disabilities are hesitant to register with accessibility offices for accommodations?
Um, Again, it goes back to the trust thing. Uh, but the other thing is, so if they were in high school and they had um, I can't remember what the name of it is now, but they had, their own accessibility assessment. When they get to Queens, a lot of our students are first gen. What did it say here? I think I had a stat for that of the amount of students that were first gen students. Anyways, I think it was more than 50%. So, if your parents have never come to university, then they don't know how to direct you. They don't know, what's required of all the different processes. And it is very overwhelming, coming into university and trying to pick your courses. And I think sometimes what happens is students get scared. And like I said, they are our people. We have a hard time advocating for ourselves, because maybe we've tried and we've gotten shut down, or you know, um, something happens and we just have a hard time doing that. Uh, but even then, if students already feel like they only got here because they're Indigenous, and then those same students had to apply for accessibility services, um, to overcome more barriers. Uh, I think there's just this sense of um, getting too much, like feeling like it's not you who's actually doing the work to be here, but you've been given all these uh, like advantages, I guess, is how people see them, in order to succeed. And so I think there's just probably a lot of stigma in accessing accessibility services. There's no Indigenous, as far as I know, we don't have any Indigenous representation with our QSAS services, and I think that that would probably be really helpful, um, as well as like even just within our student wellness services, like we don't have any, uh, psychiatrists or doctor or nurses. As far as I know, no one's ever, identified that they were Indigenous. But these things are really important to be able to understand the history and to understand how that intergenerational trauma affects us emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Um, yeah.
Thanks so much, Lisa. We are coming to our end for our webinar. However, I do want to highlight a couple of things before folks start to leave. We do have our CICMH regular needs assessment open. So if you have any thoughts, any insight on what is occurring in your campus, you're welcome to share that in our needs assessment. It'll be open till December 15th. I will put the links here in the chat for folks, if I can do that. Oh, maybe not. Let me, if you go on our website, it'll be the first thing that you see on the website. And I will share the website link right here. There we go. And then our next webinar that will be hosted will be on December 16th from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. It will be recorded like all of our webinars, but it will be on navigating substance use issues and recovery supports in post-secondary institutions. And I will share that onto our chat. There we go. And the link for registration will be also available right here. And I also want to thank all of you for coming here today. We really, really appreciate that you're here. And please fill out our evaluation form when you are able to. It will pop up as soon as you exit this webinar. I also want to thank our panelists here. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and your experiences. And Megan, thank you so much for presenting the results from your Indigenous needs assessment. Folks, if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. We're here for the next maybe 5 minutes or so. And if folks want to head out, you're welcome to. I hope you have a great rest of the day.